Thank you for choosing to watch our video. Please like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon for notifications of new content. Leave us a comment and watch the other videos that we're happy to provide for you. And now, on to the sermon.
So as we look in our Bibles, we learn so much about faith. And at the end of the lesson, we're coming back to Hebrews 11. So just stay in Job 26 for now. It is a great chapter on faith. It talks about many of the ancient worthies of the Old Testament and the great faith that they had. And it's a very encouraging and strengthening chapter for us. And we learn a great deal about faith. But you and I know that we live in a world of unbelief. We're surrounded with people who don't believe in God. And there are two different directions you can go with that. Some people are just, they're atheists. They don't believe God exists, period. And then kind of on that spectrum, you have agnostics, you have skeptics. But you have them in that direction. And it seems like there are more people proclaiming themselves to be atheists today than used to. I know there are more than when I was growing up. And then on the other hand, you have people, and I describe this as practical atheism. That is, they don't say, I don't believe in God, but they live their lives just like there's no God. They sure don't pay attention to what His Word has to say. So we're surrounded by unbelief in our world today. And a lot of people look at us who do believe, and who believe the Bible is the Word of God, and they say, you folks are superstitious, you're backwards, you're uneducated, you just are believing what you want to believe, and that's what they say about us when they're more on the rabid side of atheism. Just a bunch of shepherds around a campfire spun some yarns, and that's where the Bible came from. Well, we're gonna see that's not right today, which we already don't believe that, but we're going to look at some evidences about that. But think about this for a minute. There are a lot of famous atheists, and many that are names we've heard for a long, long time. We have the founder of communism, Karl Marx, also an atheist. Andrew Carnegie, very famous industrialist of previous generation. He was an atheist. We have Sigmund Freud, who is the founder of psychoanalysis, also famous for being an atheist. And then we have Clarence Darrow. Do you remember the Scopes monkey trial, hearing about that? The Scopes monkey trial back in the 1920s. And you had Clarence Darrow on behalf of atheism, and William Jennings Bryan more on the side of faith in God. And so they had that great trial. You know, I looked for a lot of pictures of Clarence Darrow, younger pictures, middle-aged, older pictures. He looked just like that in every one of them. Because that's what atheism will do for you right there. Wish he'd smile sometime. Then you have famous, beautiful Oscar-winning actress Katharine Hepburn. She was an atheist. Francis Crick, the co-unraveler of the DNA code, also an atheist. Warren Buffett, famous investor, also an atheist. Carl Sagan, known for a lot of popular science type things that he wrote and television programs. Also an atheist. And then Ernest Hemingway, famous American author, famous for being an atheist as well. And then, of course, Gloria Steinem, who is well known for the feminist movement, and she was also an atheist. And every time atheists are in the press and believers are in the press, guess who gets the good press? It's never us. It's never us. So I want to talk with you for a few moments this morning about some evidences. Why should we believe? Now, folks, the Bible does not teach, and this will be the very last slide. The Bible does not teach that we believe just because, or we believe just because we want to. There are evidences, solid evidences as to why we should believe in God. And let's take a look at some of those. The first of those that I'll mention to you is that book that you have right in front of you. The Bible is the primary reason that we should believe in God. And when you think about the Bible and you think about various characteristics, consider the background. It was written over a period of about 1,500 years by about 40 different authors from various empires on 3 continents, in 3 languages, written by people in various different circumstances of life. We have kings, we have shepherds, sometimes it's the same guy, King David, but also written by prisoners, written by people who were educated, people who were not formally educated, written by people who were slaves, written by people who were free, people in all kinds of circumstances. Yet in spite of the variety of times and circumstances and authors that were given, we still see that the Bible has one clear, consistent message without glaring contradictions. What an incredible book the Bible is. It gives us great reasons to believe. Among those many things that we see in Scripture that harmonizes with itself and that harmonizes with the world around us is this historical example, and that of the Hittites. We read a lot about the Hittites in the Old Testament. They were enemies of ancient Israel, and so we read quite a bit about them. But as we read about the Hittites, there were certain unbelievers who were critical of the Bible who said, you know what, we can't find the Hittites anywhere outside the Bible. And the conclusion they came to is, you know, the Hittites must just be a mythological people that people who wrote the Bible just made up and stuck it in there because they didn't really exist. But you know what? Archaeology is an amazing thing. And the more excavations that were done over in that part of the world, guess what eventually archaeologists discovered in the dirt? The Hittites. We know about the language of the Hittites. We know about the culture of the Hittites. We know a lot about the Hittites from what they've dug up over there. And so this criticism against the Bible, like so many criticisms against the Bible, has been shown to be illegitimate because the Bible is legit in what it says and in how it says it. There have actually been discoveries they've made over in the Middle East because they looked at the descriptions that are found in the Bible, and that's what they discovered when they looked. It's an incredible book, and its historical accuracy is a powerful part of that. The Bible is also scientifically accurate. If you're still in Job 26, your finger hadn't fallen asleep yet in Job 26. The Bible is also scientifically accurate. Now, I will tell you, the Bible is not a science textbook. But when the Bible speaks to matters scientific, it is always accurate. So, for example, in Job chapter 26 and in verse 10, Job 26 and verse 10, it says, He has inscribed a circle on the surface of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. In other words, the earth is spherical, like a basketball. Or that famous line from Christopher Columbus in the old Bugs Bunny cartoon, the earth, she's not a flat like the pancake, she's a round like the basketball. Sometimes that's just not as funny as it is at other times, but that's okay. But the earth is spherical. The earth is not flat. It amazes me today how many flat earthers there are around. The earth is not flat. The earth is spherical. And the Bible declares that long before it could have been scientifically understood. Secondly, from the same chapter, let's notice that the earth is suspended. It is not mounted on top of something. So we go up to verse 7. Concerning God, He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Now, one ancient culture used to say that the earth was on the back of a giant catfish swimming through a cosmic sea. Okay, I'm as much East Texan as y'all are. I'm from Northeast Texas, not from this part of East Texas. I'm as much East Texan as y'all are. Love me some catfish, but the earth is not on the back of a giant catfish swimming through a cosmic sea. There's another culture which says that the earth was on the back of a turtle, which was on the back of a turtle, which was on the back of a turtle, which was on the back of a turtle, to infinity, I guess, I don't know. The Bible doesn't have any superstitious nonsense like that in it. When the Bible describes something scientific, it's accurate when it gives descriptions like that. My favorite one is in Leviticus chapter 17. Leviticus chapter 17 and verse 11, where here it says, For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it, the lifeblood, I've given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. Two things here. First of all, from a medical point of view, the life of the flesh is in the blood. Now, when George Washington, our first president, died, it was not because of the illness that he had. It's because they believed in bloodletting to such a severe degree, because blood in their minds just wasn't that essential. And so let's get the impurities out. Let's drain his blood. They drain too much. You can't live without enough blood. That's why he died. If they'd read their Bibles, 1500 BC approximately, Moses wrote that the life of the flesh is in the blood. That's point number one. Point number two, notice that the reason that blood sacrifice deals with sin is because blood and life go together. Blood and life go together. It takes a sacrifice of a life to deal with sin. And of course, the blood of bulls and goats was only a small approximation and a foreshadowing of Jesus who would come, and only his sacrifice can truly take away sin. And so there's that second point that we see. So the scientific accuracy, now folks, I'm touching the hem of the garment on this. The water cycle is described in the Bible. They could not have known that back when the Bible was written. The jet stream is described in the Bible accurately. They could not have known that when the Bible was being written. It was only by the inspiration of God that these things could be declared. And if the Bible is scientifically accurate in ways that humans in those days could not have understood, that tells us there has to be a supernatural origin of the Bible, and his name is Jehovah God. Next, let's notice that the Bible is accurate when it comes to geography. Now, turn to Acts 15. This is just something in passing, but it's also very significant from the standpoint of evidences. Acts chapter 15, here we see the travels of Paul and others. They've got a dispute, and they're trying to get this corrected. So they're going from Antioch of Syria. They're going to Jerusalem. And notice how it reads. When Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and some others of them should go up to Jerusalem. Uh-oh, wait a minute. That's south. That's not how we'd say that, is it? They went up to Jerusalem. Well, we would say they went down, wouldn't we? But that's not their concern. Their concern is not north, south, east, west like ours is. Their concern was topography. They went up to Jerusalem because the topography of the land is an upward slope as you go toward Jerusalem. Even something just incidental like that, notice how powerful that is, that even in the Bible it is accurately recorded in the way that they would speak things. Those are powerful, incredibly powerful. To me, this is even more so. As we look at fulfilled prophecies, turn to Isaiah chapter 13. Isaiah chapter 13 is one of my favorite prophetic passages for a couple of reasons. One of those is it's written in apocalyptic form, which means it's highly figurative, language of judgment. And so it's written in such a way that it helps us understand how this kind of literature works. How do these highly figurative descriptions of judgment, how does that work? This is a great passage for understanding that. Another reason I love it is because I can then take that, and every time I find an apocalyptic passage, I can say, oh, I remember how it worked in Isaiah 13. I bet it works the same way here. And it does. Book of Revelation, for example. The way that this works is consistent with how to understand other apocalyptic passages. Now, several things. Isaiah 13 and verse 1, the oracle concerning Babylon. Okay, he's writing about Babylon. Now, Isaiah wrote from about the year 750 to about the year 690 BC. Okay? 690 would have been the latest he wrote. When did Babylon arise? Early 600s. So at the very latest, he would have written close to 90 years before Babylon even arose. Keep that in mind, because he says, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. And then we come down to verse 6, wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be limp, and every man's heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take a hold of them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look at one another in astonishment and behold their faces. And then in verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord is coming cruel with fury and burning anger to make the land desolate, and he will exterminate their sinners from it. For the stars of heaven, here's a very apocalyptic part of this, the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises. The moon will not shed its light, etc., etc., etc. I will punish the world for its evil. Wait a minute, I thought he was talking about Babylon. Well, verse 1 it says it's Babylon. Now come down to verse 17, actually verse 19, and Babylon. All that in the middle is a highly figurative description of God's destruction of Babylon. There are a lot of times in the Bible when you read passages that sound like the end of time. Some of those are not. Now, some of them are, but you have to look at the passage to figure out, is this an apocalyptic description of the fall of ancient Babylon, or of ancient Medo-Persia, or of ancient Greece, or of ancient Rome, or of ancient Jerusalem? Or is this a more literal description of the end of time? Look at the passage and it'll tell you which one of those that it is. But in this one, this is about the fall of Babylon. Now, with that in mind, consider this is close to 90 years before they even rise to power. They don't fall until the 530s BC. The very latest Isaiah wrote was 690. How much is 690 minus 530? It's a lot, okay? It's over 100 years. It's a lot. So what he writes here is prophetic because it talks about the fall of Babylon long before they even rise to power, and certainly long before they fall, but there's more. Look at verse 19 again. Verse 19 says, and Babylon, the beauty of the kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldeans' pride. When Babylon ended up falling, it would be the kingdom of kingdoms in that part of the world. Folks, they didn't become the kingdom of kingdoms for about 90 years after this was written. He could not have predicted that. Furthermore, they didn't fall for another 70 years. We know that empire lasted 70 years. They didn't fall for another 70. So it was long before this happened that it was prophesied. So this is, in a backwards way, a prophecy of the rise of Babylon, 90 years before it happened, and then more straightforwardly of the fall of Babylon in the 530s BC. Isn't that amazing? All right, well, let's pause here for just a moment. You remember the Psychic Friends Network? Anybody remember the Psychic Friends? They used to be all over television. You had Dionne Warwick, who should have stuck to her singing career. You had a lady who claimed to be an islander named Cleo. And what you did is you call in on their either 800 number or 900 number. I think it changed at some point. And you call in, and they'll give you a free reading. Okay? You want your palm? Well, they can't see your palm. But you tell them some things, and they'll give you a reading about your future. Psychic Friends Network. Okay? You know what happened to the Psychic Friends Network? They went bankrupt. Well, I guess they didn't see that one coming. That was funnier than that. Because that's how psychics work. Okay? They don't have real power. They don't have real insight. They can't really predict anything. Now, I will tell you, some of those people are really good at reading people. So you take somebody who goes in there, they can ask you a few questions, figure some things out about you, and then they know how to use that to make it look like they're doing something amazing. They are not. What they say is very much like, if you've ever looked at the horoscope or gotten your fortune cookie reading, if you've ever looked at that, it's always something so generic it can mean anything. Now, usually I look one up and I tell you what mine is today, but I didn't. But it's always something like this. A really special opportunity is coming your way today. I got to come worship the Lord. Special opportunity. See, they make it sound like it'd be just about anything. That's not how Bible prophecy worked. Notice how different Bible prophecy is from that kind of nonsense. We have a nation named 90 years before they rose to power, indicating that they would be in power. Secondly, it writes about their fall well over 100 years before they would fall. It writes about that as well. But it gets even better as we think about this, because we have them also being destroyed, and it names the nation who will destroy them. Same chapter, look at verse 17. Behold, I am going to stir up the Medes against them. And who destroyed the Babylonian Empire? The Medes in concert with the Persians. Yet, well over 100 years before it happened, it names even the nation that would destroy them. But it gets even better. Turn to chapter 44, Isaiah chapter 44. And notice what it says at the end of the chapter, verse 28. It even names the king who will bring about their demise. Isaiah 44, verse 28, it is I, God, it is I who says of Cyrus. And we know the Medes in concert with the Persians destroyed Babylon. Cyrus was the Persian king. It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built. And of the temple, your foundation will be laid. Now, if you look historically at the order all these things happened in, at the very latest, he writes in 690, Jerusalem isn't destroyed until the 600s. They don't get restored by Cyrus until the 530s. And then they have to rebuild these things, but the temple in Jerusalem were still very much standing, thank you very much, when Isaiah wrote this book. In fact, when Isaiah wrote this book, the northern 10 tribes were going to be under siege by the Assyrians, and they get taken away in 722. So during Isaiah's lifetime, they're taken away. But Jerusalem, including the temple, was protected, and they were not destroyed by the Assyrians. And they lasted over 100 years after that before they actually were destroyed by the Babylonians. So if you look at all these on a timeline, and then you see when Isaiah wrote, look at all these predictions in specific fashion that are given long before they took place. Dionne Warwick just wishes the Psychic Friends Network had that kind of clout back in the day, but they did not. So this text tells us about things that happened at least 154 years before they did. But let's look at one more. Turn to Daniel chapter 8. This one is also quite amazing. In fact, this prophecy in Daniel is so amazing that skeptics have to try to figure out a way that this was written way later than it was, because they know just how powerful this would be against their skepticism if this is truly written when it was, as it was. So in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has a vision, and there's a ram, and there's a goat, and they have a big battle, and some things happen. Okay, now come down a little bit further, and let's see the interpretation, verse 21. Or actually, verse 20. The ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. A ram with two horns, one horn was higher than the other because one side of the Medo-Persian Empire was more powerful than the other. And so we see that, and keep in mind, Daniel writes, he writes in the 500s BC, and what we're reading about here doesn't happen until the 300s BC. We got about a 200-year span of time from the time he writes this until the time it happens. Yet he names all these things that are going to take place. Verse 21, the shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. Alexander the Great, the emperor of the Greek Empire, is very much involved in this. And the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. That's Alexander. The broken horn in the vision, the one horn is broken and four more come up in its place. The broken horn and the four horns that arise in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. That is, when Alexander the Great dies, the Greek Empire will be broken into 4 kingdoms, but none of the 4 will ever have the power that the one united Greek Empire had under Alexander the Great. And folks, we know all about this historically. So the 4 kingdoms that the Greek Empire ended up becoming in the 300s BC were the Ptolemies down around Egypt. You have the Seleucids in the area of Iraq and Syria. You have Lysimachus and then Cassander over around Greece. And so historically we know about these things, yet hundreds of years, 200 years plus before it happened, Daniel said that it would, and names and gives specifics that a psychic would not be willing to even try to do, because what God's prophets did through the Holy Spirit was real, and what psychics do is not. Powerful evidences for faith in God. Because, folks, if the Bible includes such things that could not have been known by humans decades, and in some cases hundreds of years before it happened, then that means this book is inspired and that God is real, and that we can put confidence not just in those prophecies, but in everything the Bible says about everything, including Jesus. Oh, and by the way, we didn't even talk about a prophecy of Jesus, but how incredibly amazing are those as well. So we believe, because the Bible gives us evidence in the very nature of the Bible, it presents us evidence that is too strong to ignore. But my friends, also, scientific principles themselves also speak toward the existence of a creator God. Think about it. With God as creator, all accurate science, won't it point toward a creator? It will. Turn to Romans chapter 1, and while you're turning to Romans chapter 1, I'll quote you just a little bit there from Psalm 19. Turn to Romans chapter 1. That other passage on the board says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament," or the expanse, "shows His handiwork." That is, you can look at the creation, and it speaks to, with great evidence, the existence of the Creator. It is powerful evidence. Romans chapter 1, here as he talks about the pagan world and the ungodliness that they have, come down to verse 20. He says, "For since the creation of the world," and I love this statement, "His invisible attributes," His eternal power and divine nature, "have been clearly seen." I love that. His invisible attributes have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. In both Psalm 19 and Romans chapter 1, the bold assertion in Scripture is, when you look at the universe around you and the world around you, it speaks to the existence of a creator God who has power and wisdom. And it speaks so clearly to His existence that to say He does not exist would actually be to ignore the evidence. When we look at the world around us and we look at well-established scientific principle, it will point us toward God, not away from Him. It will point us toward God and not away from Him. And thus, let's consider a few of those. The first of those I'll mention to you is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this used to be my favorite evidence, my favorite non-biblical scientific evidence of the existence of God. Second law of thermodynamics goes like this. Have you looked in the mirror lately? Everything runs down. Turns gray, and it runs down. Went out to the truck one day, put my key in the ignition. Sometimes you get that click when your battery's really dead, but you get, I didn't even get a click. So I called my buddy. He came. We took my battery off, went to the store, got a battery, put it back on. I'm back in business for about 2 or 3 years, and then we're going to repeat this process because everything runs down. You go to the store, you buy a bunch of bananas. I've never bought a bunch of bananas that look quite like that. But anyway, you buy a bunch of bananas and you take them to the house and they get just right and you eat the ones that you want and then you don't get to all of them and then you know what happens after that, right? You make banana bread. And being good East Texans, that's what we do. Everything runs down. Now think about this. Everything runs down. That means the universe itself is running down. And both scientists who believe in God and scientists who don't believe in God will both tell you the same thing about this. The universe is running down. They'll talk about the expansion of the universe and how that it is continuing to expand like that. And as it expands, what's happening? It's ultimately cooling. Now, it takes a while for all that to happen, but that's what's taking place. And both believers and unbelievers who are scientists will tell you the same thing when it comes to that. But here's the deal. Since there is no scientific explanation for how the universe could have gotten wound up, that means there has to be a non-physical explanation for how the universe got started in the first place. And folks, his name is Jehovah God. That is powerful evidence for the existence of God and of creation. Again, that used to be my favorite. It's not anymore. I've got a new favorite. It's been my favorite for a while, and that is probability. Probability. It is very powerful scientific evidence for God and for creation. So we're going to do an experiment to start this off. And first of all, we're going to have a box with 4 white marbles in the box. What is the probability in a blind test that you will put your hand in the box, and if you bring a marble out, it'll be white? What's the probability? It's 100%. Yes, y'all are excellent math students, I can already tell. It is 100%. So if you get a marble out, then it's going to be white. There's a 100% chance. Okay, I like my odds. Let's say that now you number the marbles and you close your eyes and you reach in the box and you pull one out. What is the probability that you will pull out marble number 3? 25. I mean, we know how to make change, don't we? 25%. So you got a 25% chance. And, I don't like my chances as much as I did the first time. But, 25%, 1 out of 4, that's not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. But now we're going to make it even more difficult. We're going to take these numbered marbles. Now we're going to ask the question, what is the probability that I can draw them out in order? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, don't answer too quick unless you know a lot about math, because this is not the easiest one to think of. For this, mathematicians use what they call factorials. And factorials, it looks like you're really excited when you start talking about factorials because it has an exclamation point. Okay, it's not really an exclamation point. It just looks like one to us. Following that, and you pronounce it 4 factorial, and here's how it works. You take the number of objects you have, and we have 4, and you multiply 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, and how much is that? Not yet. Okay, so it's 24, and so the chance of drawing out them in order is you have a 1 out of 24 chance of that occurring, and if you got a calculator and you figured that up, that's a 4% chance. Now, folks, that's about the chance of the Cowboys winning the Super Bowl this year. Big Dallas Cowboy fan standing right up here before you, lifelong, hurts my heart, but there you go. It's not real high. Now, I don't like my chances of that. Now, can it happen? Yes. If you and I did an experiment with this, it would happen every now and then, but it wouldn't happen real often, and we'd have to do it a lot, probability, we'd have to do it a lot probably for that thing to take place. But folks, when we talk about a living organism, or even one cell, the number of parts is so astronomical in number, to think that could just happen by chance is pretty absurd. The famous evolutionist Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker, and he estimated the probability of a monkey typing on a 27-character keyboard. That I feel like that's what I'm doing sometimes. 24-character keyboard, typing this famous phrase from Shakespeare's Hamlet, methinks it is like a weasel. I have no idea what that means. But anyway, he said the probability of that, because it has 28 characters, if you include the spaces but exclude the capital M and exclude the period, because that takes a little more work, he says the chances of that happening is 1 over 27 to the 28th power. Okay, that's a big number. It is 12,000 million. That's a big number. I don't like my chances. It's only 28 things. I don't like my chances. Oh, I got 5 minutes. Here we go. So, figures like this don't help Mr. Dawkins with his evolutionary concept that life came about from chance. And I've got this whole illustration about books in a bookshelf, and preachers really like this one. But I'm going to skip right over it because y'all don't care about those books as much as me and Kyle do. But anyway, factorial chart. Now, it starts off pretty small, but notice how quickly it jumps and how high it goes. By the time you get to only 12 objects, it's almost 500 million. 1 in 500 million chance that 12 objects, only 12 objects, could just randomly come together in a way that would make proper sense. The simplest forms of life have millions of parts, not 12, millions of parts. Humans have about 60 trillion cells. Imagine the numbers on factorials about doing 60 trillion factorial. It's just unfathomable to think about something like that. So what are the chances, if purely by chance, of those parts of your body, those cells in your body just randomly coming together in a certain way? Somebody says, yes, but that's where DNA comes in. That's right. That's exactly right, where DNA come from. It's more complex than that. These things don't happen by chance. Somebody with Down syndrome, there's one small chromosomal change, small, and yet look at the difficulties that they face as a result. So let's say the human skeleton, 206 parts. 206 factorial is 10 to the 388th power, which is a 1, followed by 388 zeros. And I really hope y'all are in the mood to be impressed today, because look at these numbers. So it took a long time to get those zeros and those commas all lined up just so. And I feel like I'm doing an infomercial right now because, wait, there's more. I think that's the last one. 206 objects. 1 out of that many chance of it just coming together. Folks, probability speaks to intelligent design, intelligent creator, not blind chance. The evolutionist says, but if you just have enough time. Probability says there's not enough time. So what's the probability of a dictionary being produced by an explosion in a print shop, or a 747 from an explosion in a metal workshop, or how about a rock city by a volcanic eruption? Every living cell in your body is more complex than all of those. And we know those can't happen, yet people think life just happened. This speaks to the incredible wisdom and power of God, because it takes power and intelligence to do what chance cannot. This watch works. It works. What if I were to take it completely apart, put all the parts in a bag, and shake the bag? How long would it be before I could pour the watch back out working again? Exactly. And consequently, we come to this quotation by Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin said in his most famous book, Origin of Species, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And Mr. Darwin, I submit to you that your theory has broken down. So now look at Hebrews 11 and verse 1. Hebrews 11 and verse 1. This great chapter on faith begins by saying that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Why do we believe in God? Because of the evidence. The evidence that is in the Bible and the evidence that is around us in the world. And Psalm 19, that chapter brings both of those together when in the first few verses it talks about evidence in a general way for belief in a creator God. And then in the last portion of Psalm 19, it talks about how that God has specifically revealed himself in the pages of this word. Thank you so much for your kind attention this morning.